Hello, George, Phat Ninja Foodforest. If anyone's not familiar, another compost video. I know I make a lot of these, but so abundant this time of year. Just want to show how easy it is. I just want to make a nice comment on how fast I get mine up to heat, and it's from years of doing this. We've been doing this for years and years. The farm's almost 15 years old now. We first started doing our first garden beds, got chickens. The permaculture is 11 years old now, the install, so we compost on a regular routine. And that's what this video is, showing if you have chickens or ducks, how regular it is. Right now, we've got a lot of garden waste, all these greens. We've got the chicken bedding. That chicken straw being the carbon, the heavy carbon. I think it's 250 or 400 to 1. I'm not going to try to say too much about that. It will confuse people. And that's what my point is. If I try to take each of these materials that I'm using here and break down how much carbon and how much nitrogen is in that, I'm going to really confuse myself and not get it right. It's much easier, as many people have heard, to use a 2/3 rule. 50-50 at best, but 2/3 is better. So you have 2 browns to 1 green. The brown being that carbon, the green being that nitrogen. That's how nature does it. That's how we see all the surplus around us. We're speeding that process up by putting it together in that ratio, but in a large enough pile that all those microbes and organisms, when they're feeding, create that heat for us. So what we've got here is the chicken bedding, so the carbon, heavy carbon, but a bunch of poop from them laying on it all the time, sleeping on it, pooping on it. So that kind of cancels itself out. Over here, we'll look at, there's some wood chips, which are very heavy, again, in the carbon, but they've been out in the chicken area where they feed them, and they've been pooping all over it. Here, we've got mostly all greens. It's going to be a bunch of comfrey that gone to flower, some weeds from around the garden, and we got kitchen scraps. This bowl goes next to our kitchen, next to our sink. Fills up once or twice a week, gets dumped into this blue bin with a lid outside, so there's no smell to it. That sits outside the kitchen door. Once every month to 6 weeks, that chicken bedding needs to be changed out, so we collect more materials and we build a compost. That way we're getting at least 3 by 3. So the kitchen scraps are another green. 3 by 3, I mean 3 feet by 3 feet, enough cubic mass, enough cubic feet there. And lastly, I have just straight wood chips that I'm breaking down out front. That's just heavy carbon for us with some fungal component in there right now. Been breaking down a little bit. So by doing that, I've done about a 2/3 rule, 2 browns to 1 green approximately. And it can be a hard, but like I said, after years of doing it, you really get a feel for it. A good way to know is to make sure that, and I'm going to add water as well. I'll be watering really heavily as I go, making sure it's very saturated and make it into a pile. Is to get a somewhat inexpensive compost thermometer. I'll come out and I'll measure this tomorrow morning and see where it's gotten. It'll probably gotten up to 120-ish, maybe more, depending, and I'll know. If it shoots right up past 140, 150, it's probably going to go past 160, at which point I'm doing more harm than good in there. I'm causing ammonification, it's drying out, and I'll need to turn it right away. If not, it's going to slowly rise over 2-3 days up to that 141 or above, and that's what I need. 141 or above is going to kill any of these weed seeds that are getting added to it, any disease pathogens that might have been on the branches of the wood chips going in there. It's going to be hot enough to kill that. I've made these videos enough times. If you've seen them, we'll do at least 3 turnings of it. Stir it 3 times. Taking the outside of that pile, making it the inside, and inside the outside. It's actually the top, bottom, and the middle, and we'll rotate those locations with 3 turnings. Keep this relatively short. We'll just have a look at the materials so you can see what we're working with. Again, a lot of comfrey and other garden weeds in there. Some gone to seed. So we gotta make sure we kill those seeds. These are some old planters I had in there with the wood chips that were in the chicken area. It's got some manure on it. Then a heavily manured straw. That's just our coffee and whatnot in there, and carrots and things we've been eating. And we'll make that into a pile in here, adding water. Pile it up next to that old one. I'll also take some of this old compost that's on there. It's in there. There's a compost that's finished and cooled already. Completed its heating process, been turned 3 times in the static form now, getting more of a fungal component to it. I'll take a few handfuls of that, and every few layers I'll put that in there. Doing that, we end up with all this gorgeous soil around here. If you're familiar, I have a worm farm now too. We feed the worm farm. It creates all this abundance with 0 outside input, well, with 0 outside fertilizers, pesticides, or insecticides. just compost teas, compost extracts, allowing us to have the gooseberries and the blueberries and all these things, perennials, and the figs. These are really good right now. They've ripened up really nicely. I missed them for a while. The birds and the chipmunks have been getting them. The cornelian cherries are just starting. But it says it's going to keep this short. Another one over here. All this abundance from catching and storing that energy, from composting all these materials. We're not sending that organic matter to the curb. Instead, we chop and drop in place, compost, feed to our worms and worm compost, making it even better. Try to use those resources as many times as we can. Change a bit on the holiday. I'm George. Peace.